One, two, one, two. Mic check. Right on time. Heading to the gym to listen to this. Let's get a good workout on, all right? Stay strong. Back with Donald Goines' Swamp Man right here on Ralph Reed's Raw, ladies and gentlemen. I'm glad y'all tuning in on this late night. I ain't gonna bullshit y'all. This is not exactly a performance for y'all. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not trying to read, hey, Lady Rain, hello, 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 fellow royalty. Hi, 808. Salute to you. Here we are with Donald Goines on Ralph Reed's Raw once again, and I just gotta say, folks, I'm going to mess up. You're gonna hear crazy elements outside. This is why I choose till now to record as opposed to earlier when all the elements are going crazy. And I'm gonna mess up every now and again. I'm not doing an actual performance per se. What I am doing is recording, right? I'm recording on the microphone to make a stylized version later on of Swamp Man. It'll take a while because I got a lot of things backed up. But here I am recording what the same way I would behind the scenes and then have y'all wait all of this time for whatever. So instead of making y'all wait, y'all can hear a raw version on Ralph Reed's Raw. Now again, you're gonna have to put up with the mistakes of me stopping. I'm gonna read lines over to improve the diction, whatever the case may be. Some people really don't understand that. Some people, even though I say this in the beginning of the damn program, they insist on taking the times out of their day to write something negative. Hey, you keep messing up. Duh! I told you I would. This ain't school. Now then, if you can bypass all of that and, you know, you know what I'm saying? If you can ignore that, then okay, we're gonna be fine. All right, so let's begin on the ULL tip. All right, we're gonna start chapter 4. Where is it? I'm gonna find it right here. Here you go. All right, but wait, before I begin though, to be honest, I gotta give a big shout to all the people that's looking out. So let me say hello to them right now. It'll only take a second. All right. Let's go here. Let's go there. Swamp Man's in the air. All right, y'all. Gotta give a big shout to all the executive producers. Nardowick, Maya Jackson, Scooby, Anika Evans, Alicia B., Vashiti Smith, Lanasia Cornish, Nana James, Supreme Goddess Nikki, Alasia Ross, Lovey Parker, Marvin Kuntz, P Money, Chris Johnson, Stephen Wade, Glenda Harper, K. Marie Billingsley, I've Been a Healer, Queen, Maria da Silva, T. Money, S. Salahuddin, 704 Liquor House Talks, J. Bobo, Shalimar Macon, Danielle Cunningham, Papa Perk, Anaya Drake, Just Being Kiki, Sherelle 5150, Damian Irving, Sweet D, Cynthia, Lost Roads, Keith Woods, See All the Time, Trey Noel, Toedi, Tequila Green, Mr. Light, Goosejack, Dejuan Manuel, The Fort, Lady Rain, Pretty Ricky, 22, Desmond Thomas, Daryl Carrington, Marcus Valentine, Kyla Isla and the Mighty Isla Family, BLE 007, Michael Woodford, Pat Master, OST, Anthony Liege, Calm, Tama, Mr. Fulltime, Brian Latham, Mr. T, and Logic and Friends, the Ranchers Union. All right, without any further ado, for me or for you, let the reading commence. But I thought I would have had this right there. Where is it? Okay. Of course, I'd leave it elsewhere. Again, let the reading commence. Chapter 4. George slipped the heavy boots off, then removed his shirt and tied it around his shoes. Now he was ready, he believed. He had waited long enough. His ambushers should have gone long ago if their plans for Henrietta were still in force. The dugout was out of reach, but that was a small matter. He didn't have to have a boat to get across the 50-foot creek. George waded into the water until it came up to his chin, then started to swim. He made sure he didn't splash loudly, not out of fear of the men who had shot at him, but just in case one of the alligators from the swamp might have taken a notion to come this far upriver. It had happened in the past, and he wasn't taking any chances. To meet one of the creatures out in the middle of the creek would spell big trouble. He swam with care, making each stroke count until he reached the other side. He cut through the heavily wooded section until he came to the tiny path that led away from the river. Sometimes he ran, other times he walked briskly until his wind came back. And then he'd break out and start tracking again. I must pace myself, he warned himself. But in his haste, he found himself running at top speed until he was completely spent. The thought that everything was his fault kept flashing through his mind with each step he took. Finally, he had to stop and lean against a tree until he could catch his wind. Tears of despair rolled freely down his cheeks. Even if he hurried, he knew now that he would be too late. It had taken him too long to walk through the woods. With a boat, he would have never been there. And the thought that nothing could really happen to his sister was no more than a young boy's foolish dream. He had seen them murder his father, so why wouldn't the rednecks misuse his sister if they felt like it? Suddenly, he heard a nerve-shattering scream. The desperate cry soared through the forest until he had to put his hands against his ears to blot out the sound. Then slowly, he began to make his way toward the noise. The closer he got, the more cautious he became. He moved on the tips of his toes, knowing that if he was discovered, death would be his lot. One second, y'all. Hurry up. As soon as he thought he was near enough to them, he got down on his knees and began to crawl. He moved slowly, pushing sticks out of his way that would have cracked under his weight. The screams became even more nerve-wracking as he drew nearer. Stretched out on his stomach, he reached out and shoved aside the remaining bushes. The sight that greeted him was so shocking that he closed his eyes tightly, trying not to see what he could hear all too well. Henrietta struggled against the overwhelming odds, while two of the brothers stood back and laughed. Only the youngest two, Sonny Boy and Jamie, wrestled with the woman. She kicked out at them and tried to use her nails, but it was to no avail. Her thin white blouse was ripped from her back, and then came her bra. Being half naked in front of the white men drove her to a frenzy. She screamed and scratched like some wild animal. There was no thought of surrender. After receiving a deep scratch down the right side of his face, Jamie, screaming like a woman, struck out wildly with his fist and knocked Henrietta off her feet and onto her back. Sonny Boy bent down and jerked her pants down to her knees. "Hot doggy!" Sonny Boy yelled, and followed it up with a rebel yell as he leaned down and snatched her mini panties down. But before he could get them completely off, Henrietta regained her senses and began struggling frantically. At the sight of her pubic hairs, Jamie let out a cry of lust and threw himself down, pinning her arms. "Get him off, Sonny! Get him off!" he ordered breathlessly as he felt his penis becoming hard and stiff. "God damn it! She won't stop kicking!" Sonny yelled as he tried to get the panties completely off the woman. Finally, he knelt down on one of her legs and pushed the other one as wide as he could get it. But this didn't work because now the pants were stretched and just became tighter. "My God, fuck all that crap!" Jake stated as he strolled over. He took out his long Bowie knife and reached down and cut the garments free from the woman's legs. He grinned, narrowly missing being kicked in the face as he stepped back from his handiwork. The sounds of her cries stung George until he had to fight back the madness that was about to overcome him. If only he had brought along the shotgun. Even if he had to resort to strength to take it from the old man, that would have been better than what he was hearing. That would have been better than what he was hearing. He refused to open his eyes. The guilt lay on him heavily. Each scream was printed in his memory. Jamming his finger as far into the woman as he could, Jamie let out a cry of bewilderment. "By God, we done got hold to a real virgin! It ain't a nigger bitch this side of heaven as old as her and still a virgin. Niggers just don't practice things like that, which could expect from a white woman," Jake said loudly, sneering as if his words had to be the truth. Jake moved closer to the struggling woman and Jamie removed his hand. He tried to ram 3 fingers into the woman at once. "God damn it," he retorted. "This is some of the tightest pussy I ever played with." He continued to force his fingers inside the woman until 2 of them went in. Pushing hard and deep, he grinned evilly as she screamed out in pain. As he removed his fingers, blood gushed out from where he had busted the maidenhead. He stared down at her bleeding cunt as if it was some rare jewel that he had just discovered. After that, Henrietta made up her mind to stop trying to fight them off and to save her strength, so that one day she will be able to testify against the four brothers. Sonny Boy stepped back with a frown on his face. It was quite evident that he didn't have any stomach for the bloody pussy. By God, he growled. I ain't about to stick my pecker in no butchered hog. You can bet on it. Henrietta gave a sigh of relief. She prayed that the others would feel the same way. Maybe staying a virgin would pay off after all. She remembered the times back at college when she went to the dances so happily. But after a while, the word had spread that she wouldn't fuck. None of the black brothers wanted to waste their time on a black woman whom you couldn't even lay unless you married her. Even as she prayed with her eyes closed, Jamie was quickly disrobing himself. His shirt came off first, then the overalls, until he wore only a dirty pair of gray underwear with the sleeves and legs cut off. Jamie didn't bother to remove the underwear. He pulled out his small 4-inch belly button dick and jumped down between the woman's outstretched legs. He ignored the blood as he pumped up and down, grunting like a pig in heat. "Ride 'em, cowboy!" Jake yelled excitedly. His shallow face was flushed, and the scar on his left cheek began to glow as if too much blood was rushing to his head. None of the others bothered to watch the oldest brother. Zeke pulled out his prick and began to masturbate. "What the hell are you doing that for?" Sonny Boy inquired, his eyes narrowing down to tiny slits as he observed his older brother. "So that I can," his voice came in gasps as he tried to answer while reaching a climax. The sperm spurted out in a long arc. Only a small amount got on his hand. He rubbed it off on his pants leg, then answered his brother, "I want to stay with that black pussy for a while, Sonny. Don't you know if you jerk off first, you could damn near hump all night after that?" With a sudden yell, Jamie gave a shrill scream, not unlike the sound a woman would make, and tried to roll off the woman. "God damn!" he roared. "This bitch is stiffer than my damn pecker was." He slowly lifted himself from between the woman's legs. Blood was spattered down the front of his underwear, but he paid no heed to it. "Ain't no fun, no cunt this cold, boys. Looks like we done wasted our time." Sonny Boy shook his long, shaggy hair out of his eyes and kicked Henrietta viciously in the side. She yelled loudly, but remained on her back. The sight of his brother jerking off had aroused Sonny Boy more than the sight of the woman being fucked by Jamie. "Now, hold your horses there," Jake, the oldest of the four men, ordered. "There's more than one way to skin a cat. I've been planning on this old girl for some time, so just hold up on that roughness. He spoke in a slow drawl. He was used to being obeyed by the rest of his clan. Sonny dropped his eyes, not able to meet his oldest brother's glance. He had been clubbed down too many times in the past to try arguing with Jake. The three men watched as Jake removed an old army canteen he had tossed down beside an old tree stump. "I told you boys I'm going to stump break this here filly, and I mean every word of it," Jake stated coldly as he walked over toward the woman. His eyes glittered dangerously as he knelt down beside her. From the bushes where he hid, George finally opened his eyes and glanced at the scene. Since he hadn't heard any screams, his young mind tried to figure out what Jake had in store for his sister. He shivered at the thought of what the scum out there could do. Of what the scum out there could do. Henrietta never noticed Jake next to her as she kept her eyes closed and prayed. The first one hadn't been too bad, so she believed she could come through it without too much damage. If she wasn't hurt too much, she then decided to try and keep the rape from George. He was too young, and it might mess his mind up for good. Oh, Father in heaven, she prayed. It's only my body they abuse. So help me to have the strength to overcome this day. What you got there, Jake? What's that you got there, Jake? I hope you ain't about to waste no good corn liquor on her, Zeke stated as he kept his knee down on her right arm and rubbed her bare breasts with his other hand. I thought she'd have bigger tits than these little bastards, he swore as he continued to rub her breasts roughly. Jake rubbed the scar on his left cheek and gave his brothers a grotesque grin. Ain't you country boys ever heard about little Spanish fly? It's something they use down Texas way when they want to breed some stock. By God, Jake, Zeke yelled happily. If you got some of that there stuff, I'll bet a fat man against a pile of shit it takes some of the stiffness out of her ass. Jake grinned, leaned down, and lifted up her head. One of you boys force her mouth open so we could get it down, he ordered. Jamie quickly bent down and squeezed her cheeks together, forcing her to open up her mouth. Jake poured the Spanish fly down her throat. Henrietta tried to spit it up, but the men weren't having any of that. They made her hold it down and swallow all of it. How much of it is you supposed to give her? Jamie asked. Jake shook her head. Damned if I know. Jake shook his head. Damned if I know, but I reckon there's enough in this canteen to fix her up. The fellow who sold it to me said it was enough there to make a bull handle a pasture full of heifers. Aw, shit, boy. It ain't a woman born we four couldn't satisfy, Jamie. So quit your worrying, Zeke answered loudly. She ain't nothing but a fucking nigger. Wench anyway, so who gives a shit? Sonny Boy stated. It suddenly occurred to George that he just might have enough time to run home and get the shotgun and come back. It was sure he couldn't help her without some kind of weapon, and the men in the pasture had their guns laid out in such a way that it would have been impossible to belly up and steal one. Now, wait a second. Every day, sirens, buses, trains, dogs, cats, especially when they're fucking neighbors downstairs. You know, every day, every single day. Aw, shit, boy. It ain't a woman. It suddenly occurred to George. Wait. The gun that had belonged to George's father stood in the clearing, shining brightly. The gun that had belonged to George's father stood in the clearing, shining brightly, brightly. George turned his head away. There was a good probability that the gun had been the real reason for his father's death. The tall, lanky Zeke had wanted it from the first time he had set eyes on it. Zeke had even come over and tried to borrow it. But his father knew that the cracker had no intention of ever returning it. So when George's father refused to loan out the gun, the anger on the cracker's part became open hatred. He refused to take the cracker seriously. He had confidence in his rifle, but he didn't mind using it on a few hillbillies. If they crowded him. Instead of getting up and going for the shotgun, George lay there speculating over it. The sweat ran off his stern features, yet he couldn't make up his mind what to do. It was just like the night of his father's death. The cold ball of fear clutched at his gut, yet the fear was not for himself. It was for someone he loved. He was again overcome by how helpless he was. Tears ran down his cheeks as he remembered. Coming out of the outhouse, he had seen the white men. Instead of running and hiding when they called out to him, he had approached them slowly. The men had grabbed him and used him to get his father out of the cabin unarmed, something he would never have done except for his son. He had tossed out his rifle on the promise that the boy would be released. Once the gun was out and on the ground, the men had released George, who fled to the cabin, where his father met him at the door and embraced him for the last time. Even as his father held him, one of the crackers came up and clubbed his father in the head with the stock of an old shotgun. His father fell to the ground, and his grandfather came out and pulled the boy away. George had wanted to try to help his father. They dragged his father away from the cabin to the nearest tree. George watched from behind his grandfather's legs as Zeke tossed a rope over a branch and caught the noose when it came back down. "Go in the house, boy," his grandfather had ordered, but George didn't budge. He stood there and watched as the men tied his father's arms tightly behind him. Then Jake fitted the noose around the man's neck. A sharp scream from the doorway caused all of the men to turn around. Henrietta came charging out of the cabin. She was only a child at this time, so the men spared her life. They only disarmed her, then kicked her viciously in the ass and shoved her toward the grandfather with a stern order. "Gramps, you better teach them young niggas some respect, or we'll do it for you." The old man stood there with tears running down his cheeks, tightly clutching the two children to him. They could feel the old man shaking as he watched his only son being strung up. No sound came from him, but the kids could feel him shake uncontrollably. "By God, we just gotta cut this smart-ass nigga's nuts off first," Zeke yelled, waiting to see how the other men took to his notion. Earl, a short, muscular white man who owned his own land, snorted loudly. "The hell you say, Zeke? The hell you say, Zeke? This done got way past what it was supposed to be now. Some of the corn whiskey he had drunk earlier began to wear off. All you'd mention at the bar was coming out and giving this coon a good whipping. Now, instead of that, I seen you and your brother had other ideas from the start. If I'd known this was going to be a hanging, this is one redneck who wouldn't be here now. The other white men hooted and yelled. Well, I'll be damn blasted, Jake snorted loudly. If I didn't know better, I'd say old Red is a coon lover. Earl, who was called Red by most of the men because of the color of his hair, only glared around. You boys can say what you damn please, but this old boy ain't done nothing that I know of that should give us reason to hang him, let alone cut his paws off. Willie, a tall, slim man with a shallow face, leered around at the group of men. He was a cruel man by nature, disappointed in life, knowing he would never be anything but a handyman to be used by whatever redneck had the money to hire him. He hated niggers with a passion. To him, they were all animals and needed to be dead. One reason for his hatred was that he had to work in the fields right beside them, knowing that they were earning the same money that he was. The knowledge only served to pour coal on the open fire of his hatred. Ain't the way I heard it, Red, Willie growled. Them boys said we was gonna lit us a coon for daybreak. Only reason I came along. He reached over and grabbed hold of the rope and began to pull on it so that the black man with the noose around his neck had to stand on his tippy toes. Not wanting Earl to ruin his necktie party, Jake grabbed the rope and helped Willie pull on it so as not to miss out on the fun. Zeke joined his brother, and before the shocked eyes of the little boy and girl, the three men hung the tall, husky black man. As these bitter reflections crossed his mind, it also occurred to the young boy that these men might kill his sister when they finished abusing her. Just as he made up his mind to go for the shotgun, the Spanish fly the men had given to Henrietta began to take effect. The transformation was so shocking that George was rooted to his place of concealment. At first, he couldn't believe his eyes as he watched in growing horror. The spectacle in front of him was inconceivable. The woman he was now watching couldn't be his sister, for what he now saw was a shrieking, sex-crazy woman whose face was contorted in the hideous mask of lust. He became filled with a deep sense of disgust and revulsion. One second, folks. Chapter 5. The drug the men gave Henrietta hit her suddenly. It was as if all of her nerves began craving the same thing at once. Her vagina became a burning flame, a fire that was about to consume her. She began writhing in the throes of an uncontrollable anguish. She lay on the ground, squirming, moaning, while she rubbed the sides of her vagina viciously. There was no tenderness, no attempt to build up to masturbating on her part. It was as if an acid had been tossed on her sexual parts, and she was trying to rub it off. Sonny Boy grinned wickedly. I want to give it to you, Jake, old boy. You sure as hell took the stiffness out of her ass. Even as he spoke, he removed his pants and shirt, revealing the same kind of underwear his brothers wore. He took his time undressing, answering each joke his brothers tossed at him with one of his own, as he got completely naked. That old boy don't want to get his drawers dirty, Zeke said, grinning broadly. You reckon you can handle it, boy? I don't reckon. I got to jerk off first, Sonny Boy answered sharply as he dropped down on one knee. Before he could move any farther, Henrietta had reached up and got him around the neck and pulled him down on top of her. Her fingers searched wildly for his prick. Finding it, she instantly raised up and vigorously forced it inside of herself. God damn! Sonny Boy groaned as it dawned on him that he was the one being raped. She held him tightly, too tightly, and when he began to reach his climax, her grip was so tight that he could not enjoy it. Turn loose, gal, goddammit! He growled angrily. Instead of turning him loose, Henrietta tightened her grip and rolled her pelvic bone against him brutally. He groaned from the pain and struggled to break free. Jake nodded his head at Zeke. Get ready, boy. You're next. This old gal ain't in the mood for waiting, so we gonna start breaking her in right. He waited until his brother had undressed, then held the man back. Just hold on, bro, he ordered the naked man. Zeke stood waiting, undecided, not knowing which way to go. He made a sorry sight standing buck naked in the clearing. His skin was dirty white, spotted with patches of yellowish hair. It was as if his body had never seen the sunlight. It was pale like a fish that has stayed out of the water too long. You stay right there, Zeke. You stay right here, Zeke, Jake ordered sharply, then walked over and helped Sonny Boy break loose from the struggling woman. Jamie was no help at all. He was rolling on the ground laughing, holding his sides, and pointing at Sonny Boy. As soon as Sonny Boy got free, Jake pinned the woman to the ground with his foot on her chest. As she reached for his groin, he reached down and slapped her viciously across the face. Now you listen close, gal. If and you're gonna be wanting some more of these old peckers, you listen real close. When I walk back across the clearing, you wait until I whistle like this. And he demonstrated for her. Now, gal, that's the only way you're gonna be able to get some of this white dick. You understand? Henrietta didn't really understand. At that point, she was just about out of her mind. The only thing she could think about was putting out the fire inside of her. The burning, the craving, the desire was eating her up. She started to crawl across the clearing where Jake had gathered all the men. They stood sipping on corn liquor as they watched her. As she started to crawl, Jake shook his finger at her. Gal, you ain't paying attention to your teacher. Gal, you ain't paying attention to your teacher, 'cause I ain't whistled yet. He might as well have been talking to the trees or the birds that continued to fly overhead, because they might have paid more heed to what he was saying. than Henrietta. She had only one thought and desire, and that was to reach the naked man. The sight of the worm-like penis hanging down drove her on. Something told her that the small object that hung down could bring her the temporary relief she sought. If only for a brief moment, anything would be better than the consuming fire inside of her. Maybe he could put it out. Fuck, 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 the thought flashed through her mind. It was the only way, the only thing that she cared about. I reckon it's too soon, Jake said more to himself than to his brothers standing around him. He whistled sharply anyway before she reached them. Zeke rubbed on his penis as he watched the woman draw closer. His dick was curved to the right, as if the use of his right hand had fixed the curve in it. Masturbation, or too much tender handling, made it what men called a handmade dick. Go on, boy, Jake ordered. I know you don't get much pussy, Zeke. Old coon, black or white, you just ain't been getting your rightful amount of nookie. The laughter of the three men meant nothing to the couple as they met in the clearing. Zeke was beyond caring about his brother's ridicule. Jake had been right. He was a shy man, so he didn't get much pussy. The white women wouldn't look at him, and he was too scared to go around the black settlements by himself at night, seeking out the black women who would have anything to do with a white man for a price. One of the reasons was that his family was what they called dirt poor, and many of the plantation blacks had more than Zeke's people, so he didn't have anything to bargain with. With Jake, it was different. The blacks feared him. Whenever he appeared around them, you could see the fear in their eyes. Some of them actually trembled outright, shaking in their shoes, so Jake was able to go through the plantations at will, picking and choosing like the old masters of the plantation used to do. As the woman's arms went around him, Zeke felt as if this time it was really different. This was the first time that a woman really wanted him. He could feel himself calming instantly, but unlike Sonny Boy, the tight grip of Henrietta's arms around his waist made him feel wanted. So instead of trying to break loose, as she raised up and rubbed her pelvic bone against him, trying desperately to feel his penis inside her, he pressed down, meeting her demand with his demand. He stayed with her until his penis got hard again and continued to fuck. The hooting and hollering of his brothers only spurred him on, but even with his desire, he wasn't enough for Henrietta. She wore him down, then demanded more, until he was completely drained. Even then, she wouldn't release him, continuing to hold him tightly. From his place of concealment, George began to back out until he was sure he was far enough away before he stopped crawling. Then he slowly climbed to his feet and began to run. Most of the time he ran blindly because of the flow of tears that ran down his cheeks. He had seen them give her something, true enough. But whatever they gave her couldn't have made her act like that. Couldn't have made her act like that unless she wanted to. Henrietta just liked being fucked by crackers. That's all. He couldn't face it any other way. When he reached the river, he searched up and down the banks until he found a dugout hidden behind some trees. He pushed slowly down the moss-covered bank until he reached the water. His movements had slowed up quite a bit since leaving the path in the woods. There was no need for urgency, he reasoned. She There was no need for urgency, he reasoned. She acted as if she liked what was happening. In fact, she was begging for it, couldn't get enough. George wasn't a virgin himself. Some nights, he went down to the Wilsons' plantation and put on the dog. The young girls down there liked to see him. He had taken his share of them out in the woods or to somebody's empty cabin, so he knew what it was all about. When a woman wanted it, she would ask for it if she wanted it bad enough. But no matter how much she talked, but no matter how much he talked him, but no matter how much he talked about, but no matter how much he talked about it to himself, he still thought about the drink they gave her. Spanish fly, Jake. Spanish fly, Jake had called it. He had never heard of it himself, but to his young mind, he couldn't imagine anything making a woman act like Henrietta was acting. He picked up the paddle as he jumped in the boat. He picked up the paddle as he jumped in the boat and began to row. The more he thought about it, the more unsure he became. This was something he'd have to take up with Grandpa. It was too big for him to figure out himself. Before George reached home, the shadows of the evening were moving over the swamp. The shadows of the evening were moving over the swampland. In a matter of minutes, it would be so dark that a man wouldn't be able to see his hand in front of him. George had taken his time getting home, thinking that there was no rush. He was so naive that he really believed his sister was enjoying herself. When he turned into the lane that led toward their home, he could see his grandfather standing down by the water, waiting. Before he pulled into the dry land, his grandfather called out. "Boy, where's your sister at?" The old man stood there watching his grandchild closely, his eyes unreadable in the evening light. George hung his head. He didn't know where to begin. "Gramps, them Jones boys was waiting on her. There was nothing I could do. You kept the shotgun." The boy's words stung the old man. He turned away, not wanting the boy to see the hurt in his eyes. Boy, if and you'd had the gun, do you think you could have did much?" Before George could reply, the old man spun on his heel and marched toward the cabin. George was pulling the dugout up on dry land when the old man returned, the shotgun cradled under his arm. When he reached the dugout, he removed an old pistol from under his coat. "Excuse me. I can't see too well no more, boy, so you may have to use this while I count on old Bessie here." He patted the old shotgun affectionately. "Gramps," George began, then didn't know how to explain to the old man what he wanted to say. He hesitated, then rushed into it. "Gramps, what them Jones boys is doing to her is something she seems to like." The old man tossed his way. He hurriedly added, "I mean, they gave her something to drink. Then she just stopped yelling and acting like a good woman." The old man shot the young boy a blistering stare, then inquired, "Boy, you wouldn't by chance know what it was them crackers gave her, would you?" George glanced at the water as he pushed the paddle down and pulled slowly in the direction he had just come from. "It was something old Jake called Spanish fly." For one of the few times in his life, George heard his grandfather curse in front of him. "Boy," he roared, Are you sure that's what they said they were going to give her? All George could do was nod his head. The sound of his grandfather's voice frightened him. The sound of his grandfather's voice frightened him. He had never seen him like this before, not even on the night his father was hanged. Could he have only read his grandfather's mind, he would have truly been frightened, because the old man had become fed up. This was the last straw as far as he was concerned. This was the last straw as far as he was concerned. His children were raised now, and his duty was over. When he watched his only son die, he had held back for the children's sake, or he would have died beside his son that night. But someone had to live to take care of the small children. Now his job was finished. He believed George could survive without him. Now he had to go and see about Henrietta, and if killing was necessary, he would do it. His only regret was that he hadn't made up his mind earlier when the boy first came home. None of this should have happened. It was all his fault. Boy, get this thing to moving. We ain't got all day, the old man ordered as he glanced around for a paddle, using his whole body. He worked at it with a smooth motion, and from his actions, you could see where the young boy had learned from. They moved swiftly down the river now, with both men working together. Even so, darkness fell on them before they were halfway there. Back in the clearing in the woods, the men grew tired of their game. Each man had had the woman over 2 times, some even 3 or more. They were worn out, yet she was still craving more and more and more affection from them. Jake, who had long ago trained her to come when he whistled, stared at her coldly. Well, boys, I reckon we done about played out, wouldn't you say? He glanced around at his brothers. Anybody else want another piece of ass before we go? He inquired sharply. Sonny Boy shook his head as he picked up his shotgun. I don't reckon nobody wants none, Jake. What you reckon we ought to do with her? He asked, pointing the gun in her direction. There was no doubt in anybody's mind what Sonny was thinking. He wanted to kill the woman. Hold on there, boy, Jake said lightly. Ain't gonna be none of that. Ain't gonna be none of that. What you think I went through all the trouble of stump breaking that young filly for? Not for you to blow no fucking hole through her with your shotgun. Well, what the hell we gonna do with her then? Sonny asked, his voice breaking into a whine. Don't worry about it, Jake replied as he walked over and picked up his rifle. Somebody from her family should be coming along soon hunting for her. They know we're about finished with her. Hellfire, Jake, Jamie cried out. You reckon they know we've been covering this old gal? Hell yes, boy. The way she been caterwauling earlier before we got her settled down. You can bet your ass some nigger heard her, but just had enough sense not to come running in on us spoiling our fun. Jake answered as he put the gun in the crook of his arm. I don't like that crap, Jamie answered. I don't like that crap, Jamie answered slowly as he picked up his old shotgun. Ain't about what you like or not, boy, Jake stated coldly as he took one last glance around the clearing. I reckon we can go on our way now, he said, and gave his brothers a wolfish grin. Without another glance at the crazed woman, he led his brothers down the path that would eventually lead them back to town. second, y'all. Now let me check these names real quick. Navy Nave in the place we wave. Right on time, heading to the gym. Hello, hello. And hello, hello. Salute to the folks that are hanging out with me right now. And let's begin chapter 6. The early evening moonlight was the only thing that witnessed the bereaved woman's antics. The bereaved woman's antics. When the men left, she had crawled after them until the last one in the rear had kicked her viciously in the face. Now, as blood ran freely from her nose, she still crawled around on all fours, moaning like some sick animal. Her eyes searched the clearing, looking for something she could use to still the burning inside of her. She noticed something that resembled a long stick near the pathway. As she made her way toward it, the stick began to move. She hurried, trying to overtake it, but like a drunk, luck was in her favor because the slow-moving death that she chased slithered under some bush and out of her sight. In the darkness, she couldn't make out which bush it had gone under, so as Death waited coiled, she went past it. Finally, she spotted a long stick, and this time it did not crawl away. She picked up the long dead branch and leaned against the tree. Slowly, Henrietta began to push the long stick up inside of herself, moaning loudly. The relief she sought didn't come, but she continued to try, forcing the stick deeper and deeper. With George leading the way, the two men came to the clearing on the run. It had been hard on the old man, but he had managed to keep up with the pace the young man had set ever since leaving the boat. When they reached the clearing, they could hear a woman crying, but couldn't see her in the dark. When the old man finally saw her leaning back against a tree, his heart went out to her. He at once saw what she was trying to do. When George saw what she was doing, he blushed down to his shoe tops and turned away, sickened at the sight. The old man glanced at him angrily. "What would you have her do, boy? Kill herself while you looked away?" the old man said as he rushed forward and tried to pry her hands loose from the stick. "Now take it easy, gal. Granddaddy is here now, so don't worry about a thing," he said lightly, still trying to make her release the stick. How much has she got in her, he wondered slightly. How much has he got in her? How much has she got in her? He wondered silently as he forced her hands away from it. Henrietta didn't even recognize her grandfather when she glanced up at the old man. The only thing he represented at the time was a man, a person who had that certain thing that would stop the burning inside of her. Just as suddenly as a snake, she released the stick and went for his crotch. The old man let out a grunt of pain as she grabbed his testicles. "Boy! Boy!" the word exploded from him. "Help me, boy!" It was in order. Without the boy's help, the old man wouldn't have been able to handle the young woman himself. She was beyond control, and force was the only thing that would help her at this point. With George's help, Grandpa was able to break her grip on his private parts. Before they could think, she attacked George, trying to pull his penis free. Before he knew what was happening, she had torn his blue jeans loose, busting the buttons, and she snatched wildly at what she sought. Hold her, boy, the grandfather groaned. I got to find some kind of bind so we can tie her. He set off through the woods in search of what he needed. It took a while before he found the right kind, using his bowie knife to cut enough loose. The old man's heart beat wildly. There was too much strain on it, and he was pushing it too hard. He had to stop and lean against a tree for a moment. Then he forced himself to continue. Spots appeared before his eyes, but he only blinked and tried to go on. Stumbling and just barely moving faster than a walk, he made his way back. When he reached the clearing, he had to stop and lean against the tree again. Hurry, Gramps! George yelled, not noticing the condition of his grandfather. The old man knew he couldn't walk any farther, so he dropped down on all fours and began to crawl. It was then that George noticed that the old man was in bad shape, but there was nothing he could do about it at the moment. His sister was all he could handle. His pants were down around his hips, and since he didn't wear any underclothes, his long black dick swung back and forth as he fought with Henrietta. She could see what she wanted, but couldn't get to it. It added strength to her struggle, so she was almost a match for the young boy. If he hadn't been country raised, she would have won. But he was large for his age and above average in strength. George took pride in his strength, knowing that few boys his age could match him. Slowly, the old man crawled across the clearing, dragging the vine with him. He finally reached them. He helped to tie her hands, drawing strength from his willpower, knowing the boy was lost without his help. The two of them managed to tie her feet so that she couldn't kick. The stick, boy! The stick, boy! The stick! The stick! The stick, boy! The old man panted. Get it out of her, he said, before passing out. George grabbed hold of the part of the stick still sticking out of her and began to remove it slowly. A groan of pain escaped from the young, naked woman as he pulled it out. When it finally came out, a rush of dark blood gushed from her wound and covered his hands. George twisted his face away from the sight, but not too quickly to know that Henrietta had passed out from the pain. George sat in the clearing, holding the old man's head in his lap. George sat in the clearing, holding the old man's head in his lap. He didn't know what to do. He couldn't carry both of them at once, and he didn't want to leave either one behind. If he had to, he knew that he would leave his sister. He still couldn't get over the way she had carried on. One thing was fixed in his mind. She hadn't recognized him, her own brother. Whatever them crackers had given her, it had messed her mind up. It hadn't really come to him until then that what they had given her was that strong. But now he knew that it had driven her insane. She was beyond recognizing either him or her grandfather. The night passed slowly. Henrietta fell into a deep sleep, exhausted by the passions that had overtaken her. George kept the old man's head cradled tightly against his chest. Early in the morning, old Ben's eyes fluttered open. He looked up to his grandson and began to speak in the hushed, weak voice. Ain't her fault, boy. You hear me? She don't know what she been doing. Remember the stick? Ain't no sane woman gonna do that to herself, boy. Remember that. For a brief moment, The old man's eyes held his. Then the old man repeated the same words over and over, trying to make his grandson understand. Ain't her fault, boy. Remember that always. Ain't her fault, man. Ain't her fault. The old man tried the words again, but no sound came forth. He had died, using the last of his strength, trying to explain to his young grandson that whatever his sister had done, she wasn't to be blamed. Daybreak came, and the birds sang in the trees while the squirrels danced along the high branches. It was a sight George often took enjoyment from watching, but this morning his heart was too sad to even notice. Grandpa, the sound of the voice shook George. It was the voice from the past, the voice of a little girl that he remembered so well. He turned his head and saw Henrietta crawling toward the dead body of their grandfather. He rose to his feet and cut the vines that had bound her feet. She said nothing to George, but continued to crawl until she reached the old man. She held his stilled head in her lap and began talking to him. It took a moment for George to become aware of it, but it finally dawned on him. That Henrietta didn't know that the old man was dead. She was in a childlike state, and she couldn't tell the difference. She kept asking Grandpa to get up, then asking George to wake him up. The childlike voice, her inability to recognize either of them the night before, and now her child's vision of death. It came to George that Henrietta was acting as she had when she was 10 years old. Shocked and frightened, George walked over to the body and picked the old man up. As Henrietta watched him with a blank, almost idiotic expression, George hoisted the body upon his shoulder and began to stagger back toward the river. He kept one thing in his mind. It would be much easier once he reached the river. Henrietta followed along behind her younger brother like a little girl, skipping and running. Never once did she offer to help. Once she came back and asked, "Grandpa sick?" Before George. Once she came back and asked, "Grandpa sick?" But before George could think of a reply, she had forgotten she had even asked a question and ran off, chasing a butterfly. As George watched his sister skip down the path, it occurred to him that she was as naked as the day she was born. The Henrietta he knew wouldn't have allowed him to see her in a bra, let alone stark naked. The more he thought of it, the angrier he became. His anger helped him to carry his burden. The rage he felt inside became so consuming that he ceased to notice the weight of the old man across his shoulders. The sight of Henrietta dancing naked, stripped of her pride and womanhood, fed fuel to his anger. He remembered his grandfather's last words, and they now carried meaning. One second, please. Now that she was acting like a child, he could see the real harm that had been done to her. Now he realized why they had been able to take advantage of her. Who could? Now he realized why they had been able to take advantage of her. Who couldn't take advantage of a 10-year-old child, he reasoned. Not knowing that much about the drug they had given her, he believed this was its effect. His anger was deep, a time bomb that was counting down until eventually it would have to explode. The shattered little family reached the river, and George put the body of his grandfather into the boat. He begged Henrietta to get into the small canoe, but she skipped up and down the river's edge, laughing and tossing small dirt clods at him. Finally, after she, after he, after he pretended to shove off, finally, after he pretended to shove off without her, she came running down she came running down toward the water, crying like a child. The sight tore at the sight tore at him until he thought he would cry himself. It was a slow trip home. George was afraid Henrietta was going to tip them off, was going to tip them over because she wouldn't remain still. Finally, they reached the cabin. George got out and pulled the boat up onto the shore. Then lifted up his grandfather and carried him onto dry land. Henrietta screamed out in joy and ran toward the cabin. At least she recognized that much, George said out loud, already talking to himself in the matter of men who spend a lot of time by themselves. The ground was soft, so it didn't take George long to dig out the grave. He was going to bury his grandfather right next to where they had buried his father. The thought occurred to him as he dug that he would never be the thought occurred to him as he dug that he would never be lucky enough to be buried beside his father and grandfather. There was no one to bury him. The feeling was powerful. He knew he'd never rest beside them. George finished digging and now set about trying to make a coffin. His first problem was finding enough wood for the job. He considered taking some of the lumber from the old cabin at the water's edge, but then remembered some timber out behind the old cotton patch. It took some time to drag the wood back to the cabin where he could work and still keep his eyes on Henrietta. George had already gotten into the habit of thinking of Henrietta as a child. He wondered if the drug would ever wear off and if she'd ever return to normal. But deep inside, he knew that the damage had been done. She would be this way until the day he buried her here beside her only kin. The thought that she might outlive him never entered his mind. George slowly dressed his grandfather in his best clothes, a cotton suit that the old man had bought 30 years ago. After dressing the body, he carried the old man out to the grave where he had left the coffin. Never had anything hurt him as the happenings of the past 24 hours had. As he thought about revenge, he regarded the childlike girl standing beside the grave crying. The sight of the old man in the coffin must have triggered something in her mind. As he pushed dirt on top of the coffin, her crying turned to deep sobs, the sounds one hears only from the truly bereaved. Henrietta was standing with her head down, crying her heart out. Tears began to roll down George's cheeks. He stood beside the grave and cried. Between tears, he promised himself that one day there would be an accounting. The Jones brothers would pay for the crimes they had committed against his family, and they would pay with their only possessions, their lives. Come on, child. Come on, child, George said softly, taking. Come on, child, George said softly, taking Henrietta's arm and leading her away from the grave. He could come back any time and finish the job. Right now, he wanted to get Henrietta back to the cabin. Maybe once away from the grave, she would forget. He went over to the old truck parked in front of the cabin and pulled out a small stuffed puppy. In a few minutes, Henrietta was busy playing with the toy. George sat down and began to think. It would be hell without the old man around, but they would make it. They had to. He got up and warmed some beans they'd had the night before on the stove. The old black stove was a relic of the past, with 2 burners on top, but it was always kept clean and usable like everything around the farm. While the beans heated up, George slipped out and finished covering up the grave. He packed the dirt around the grave firmly, though he wasn't too worried about any animals coming around digging it up. As he worked, a greeting came from the direction of the river. He glanced to see old Mr. Jefferson. With him was his sister's son, Little Bro, a huge Negro who was a hard worker but a slow thinker. The huge man's mind had been snapped when, at the age of 14, he had been beaten up by a bunch of white men in the woods. He had interrupted them while they were raping 2 young black girls from the plantation. The sight of the men didn't make George happy at all. He hadn't had the time he needed to sit down and plan. The experience of seeing his sister raped, then his grandfather's death was just too much. He needed to be by himself. It was too soon for any kind. It was too soon for any kind of company. For a brief second, George thought of fleeing to the woods, even if he had been seen by the men. But the thought of Henrietta being left alone with them was troubling, even though the girl didn't have anything to fear from the men. As they pulled their boat up out of the water, George noticed that old man Jefferson had a suitcase in his right hand. Jefferson came on ahead of the younger man, leaving him to make sure the boat was secure. "Howdy, George," the elderly, bent-over man said as he puffed up the trail. It was easy to see that the short walk carrying the suitcase had worn him out. "I wouldn't have come out so late, but Little Bro stopped by, so I took the opportunity to have him row me out. Never know when another chance like this will come, so I brought your sister's bag." Jefferson stared down at the mound of the earth, then took off the old black hat he wore. "I started to come with the child boy, but them honkies would have killed me sure as hell." The old man looked away. He looked pathetic. He looked pathetic standing there, self-consciously wanting to chastise himself because he believed Henrietta got killed. Because he believed Henrietta had been killed. George could see the baffled hurt in Jefferson's eyes, but didn't understand the reason for it. "It ain't my sister under the dirt, Mr. Jefferson," George said, watching the surprise. Then the joy come into the man's face. Suddenly, he thought he hit Jefferson. Suddenly, the thought hit Jefferson that it couldn't be anyone else but his old friend. In the many years he had known the old-timer, he had never beached a boat without the old man coming out of the cabin and greeting him before he was on dry land. A tear appeared in the corner of Jefferson's eyes as he looked around quickly. "It ain't the old man under there, is it?" he asked hesitantly. Uh-huh. George looked away. He didn't want to see the hurt in Jefferson's face. Maybe the old man was realizing that his time was getting near. All his old pals were going on to that other world, and yet he lingered on. "Howdy, Georgie boy," little bro called out as he came up the path, wiping sweat from his forehead with the ends of his shirt. "How come you up here digging, George?" Bro asked foolishly. "Grandpa passed away this morning," George asked. "Grandpa passed away this morning," George answered quietly, wanting to get the question and answer over with. He reached up and felt his temple. His head had started to hurt. He knew he needed to relax, to just sit down and do nothing for a while. But he wouldn't be allowed that luxury for some time yet. He would have to attend his guests just like Grandpa would have done. Now that he was the man of the house, he'd have to act like one. "Well, I'll be damned," little bro cursed. If you all be needing help out here, Georgie, you just come over to Mr. Wilson's place and let me know." The question had to be asked, but Jefferson didn't want to ask it. He waited until they started walking up the path that led to the cabin. "George, what happened to him? I mean, did he just go asleep and pass over, or did he have one of them there strokes?" George hesitated for a second. It had to be said. They would see Henrietta in a minute anyway, and that would need explaining, so it was best to get it out and in the open. I don't know just what killed him," George began, but I think it was the sight of what them honkies did to Henrietta that done it. There it was again, and this time Jefferson couldn't dodge the guilt. The Jones boys had followed her out of town like he thought, yet he hadn't done anything. He could have gone to the sheriff or something, even though he doubted that it would have done any good. But then, at least, he might not have felt so responsible. If he'd done anything other than just go back into the bar and start sweeping the floor, he wouldn't have felt so guilty. When they reached the cabin, George went in first, and then men followed. And the men followed. One look at Henrietta was enough. Jefferson blinked his eyes in shock. He couldn't believe what he saw. There was a child in front of him now, and not the little lady who had stepped off the bus the day before. The expression on Henrietta's face was that of a little girl. She sat on the wooden floor, rocking her stuffed dog, singing softly in a childlike voice. When the men entered, she glanced up, then quickly went back to her toy. "How long has she been like that?" Jefferson managed to ask, his voice shaking with emotion. "It don't seem possible that this is the same woman that got off the bus." "She's been like that ever since me and Gramps found her this morning in the woods." "She's been like that ever since me and Gramps found her this morning in the woods. Ain't been no change since I brung her home. Been acting just like a little girl instead of a woman," George stated. The words were difficult to say, as if it hurt him to speak. A sob escaped from Jefferson as he crossed the cabin floor and dropped down to his knees in front of her. "Miss Henrietta, gal, don't you remember me, old Jefferson? You went and left your bags with me yesterday, child, don't you remember? Tears rolled down the leathery cheeks of the man as he Tears rolled down the leathery cheeks of the man as he talked. You wanna play with my puppy? Henrietta asked. He's gone to the sleepy house now. Sleepy house now. She repeated in a sing-song voice. It was too much for old Jefferson. He moaned loudly, then jumped to his feet and fled. Little Bro stood dumbfounded as Jefferson ran past. He didn't know whether to follow or not. Without someone to tell him what to do and when to do it, he was at a loss. You better go now, Little Bro, George said softly. The old man will be waiting for you to paddle him back home. I reckon I'll do just that, George. But don't forget now, if you all be needing some help, just come a yelling, boy, and Little Bro sure enough will help you. Need you, George thought as he looked away. I don't even know where to begin, and the only help I get offered is from somebody in damn near worse shape than me. George walked out of the cabin and watched the man push the boat into the water. Little Bro raised his arm and waved, but Jefferson didn't even turn his head. As George watched the small boat grow smaller and smaller, he wondered why Mr. Jefferson had taken it so hard. It was as though Jefferson had seen what had gone on underneath the trees of the forest, but George knew the old man hadn't been there. Whatever the reason, he realized that he and Henrietta were going to need much more than pity. He figured he could take care of All right, I'm getting this over with. He figured he could take care of himself, but it was a new thing to him, trying to take care of somebody else. It might be hard, George reasoned. It might be hard, George reasoned, but he'd make damn sure Henrietta never went hungry. He promised himself and his grandfather that he'd always look after his troubled sister. I'm stopping now because it's just too much elemental noise that is preventing me from doing this the way I want to. Truck's got to back up even this late at night. As y'all know, the Project Heat is devastating business. And it's just as strong as it ever was. But in the meantime, folks, be so kind to check out my podcast on Spotify and anywhere else you might tune into your favorite programs. It's called Bounce. And of course, tell a friend to tune in to TURN, the United Ronin Networks. With all of those things being said, folks, see, noise, 4 o'clock in the morning almost. But anyway, I gotta say, stay sexy. It becomes you. Peace.